The program now proceeds directly to the first panel, titled Countering State Capture, Exposing Corruption Risks from Politically Connected Companies. At the end of every panel, the audience can pose questions in person, online by leaving their comments, or via the Zoom platform by checking the option Raise Hand, after which we will be able to talk to them.
Now, let me welcome Ms. Simona Ernu, Executive Director of the Romanian Academic Society, who will tell us more about the topic of the panel, present the panelists, and begin discussion within today's first panel. Dear panelists, please take your seats at the stage.
Glad to meet you. Please welcome. Simona, I'm glad to meet you. Hello, glad to meet you. Ciao. So, good morning everybody. It is my pleasure to host the first panel of the conference. It is my pleasure at the same time to present you 5 speakers from this conference, speakers that have very different profiles, very different experiences and practices when it comes to promoting rule of law and fighting corruption. I will start by presenting our first speaker, who has an online presentation, Viktoriia Poltoratskaia. She's a senior analyst at the Government Transparency Institute, and she works as a non-partisan. This government institute from Hungary is a think tank that is researching and advocating good governance. There are multiple projects that Viktoriia is involved in, including participation in the civil society, advancing beneficial ownership transparency group on beneficial ownership data and countering anti-money laundering. She holds a master's degree in political science and from the Central European University, and she's currently enrolled to a postgraduate program in political economy. Her independent research focuses on clientelism and political corruption in the Russian region. Viktoriia worked as a teaching assistant at CU for multiple courses and mostly related to research methods and design, impact evaluation, and political economy. She's interested in various policy evaluation techniques as well. Her presentation will focus on presenting the main findings and policy recommendation from the report which was recently launched. The report that was developed by the Regional Good Governance Public-Private Partnership Platform, and is the second South Europe Good Governance report. Her presentation will focus on analysis, public procurement analysis, and I will present her. I suppose she's already online. So, Viktoriia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me online. I'm very sorry that I was not able to attend in person, but apparently COVID still exists, so please get tested if you don't feel well. So today I will be presenting the results of the regional chapter that we were preparing based on the analysis that we conducted for politically connected companies and the associated corruption risks in public procurement in the region. Maybe just a little bit of a background of this report. So the countries that were involved in the analysis are Serbia, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Bosnia. So what I'm going to be presenting is the average trends that we observed in the region. And if you have any country-specific questions, I'm happy to address them. But there were certain trends or certain similarities that I think are quite universal for all of these cases. And the same goes to the recommendation part. So the first thing that we observed when we were looking at the corruption risks associated with the politically connected companies in public procurement is that while there is a big variation in contract volume share and contract value share of politically connected firms across countries in the region. So we would observe some countries where it would be on average around like 5% of all contracts or of the total value of contracts per year. And some countries with a way higher numbers, so around 15, 16%. Yet we would also observe a very similar to all of these countries, a very similar trend, which is a higher numbers when we look at the same CPV division. So CPV division is something that helps us to identify the market within which the public procurement was happening. So if we see that there is on average a higher number of politically connected companies participating in contracts distribution within the same market, it probably means that there is favoritism within certain markets, or that certain markets are more competitive than others, and those that are less competitive, they are more likely to have politically connected companies that are probably either having a monopoly there or they're somehow removing from the market the potential competitors. We can also see that there is usually an observable difference between buyer type of politically connected companies' contracts versus other companies' contracts. What does it mean? It means that depending on how the resources are allocated within certain country, what is the distribution between the federal budget and regional budget or municipal budgets, how in general the distribution of public procurement across different levels look like, we will see that there is a higher concentration of politically connected companies within certain types of buyers. So in some countries, we will see that politically connected companies are more likely to happen, or we are more likely to observe them when there is a public procurement contract distributed by the national buyer, right? So we can conclude that probably there are certain relationships between politically connected companies in this country and national buyers. There might be multiple explanations for that, and it's worth going into the case more in depth to understand why is it exactly the case. But the fact that we can observe this difference in all of the countries means that indeed certain types of buyers are more likely to be associated with politically connected companies when it comes to public procurement. We also observed something that was not very intuitive, and that's that the share of open procedures among connected firms contracts is either not really that different or not significantly different, or counters the expectations, so that we will see that there are slightly more cases of open procedures among connected firms, which is not something that we would expect, because if this is a connected company, you would expect that probably and if it's part of some favoritism or some corruption scheme, it's more likely to participate in less transparent, less open procedures. And while it always can be there is a certain probability that there is a data error, we also think that in most of the cases, there are probably other practices that are used for corruption. So tailored tender specifications, short advertisement periods, etc. This is something that we observed when we were also splitting the indicators into multiple ones and then looking at their relationship with the integrity level. We observed that there are some red flags that are more statistically significant associated with a lower integrity level or with a higher corruption risks. And for example, short advertisement period is something like that, which can point on the fact that there probably were tailored tender specifications so that only one company could have participated in this tender. And what was in line with our expectation is that the aggregated integrity score is always slightly lower for connected firms, with some variations across countries. That's an important thing because actually being politically connected does not necessarily automatically imply that there is corruption. So you first have to prove that there is corruption and there is some breach in integrity. And when we can actually see with the numbers and with the red flags that this is the case, and politically connected companies participating in public procurement indeed reduce the level of integrity, that's the starting point. That's somewhere we can start off and actually start thinking, okay, but why is it the case? What are the exact schemes? And then start tackling these exact schemes. So I will move to the recommendations here, because while we can talk about more general, broad recommendations that are applicable to any countries in any context, like, oh, the competitiveness should be higher, there should be more companies participating per tender. I think there are some steps that are important to make in this region to be able to even start revealing the exact corruption schemes. When we talk about political connections, for instance. And the first step would be an increased transparency and digitalization of asset declarations and related registers. So to establish a machine-readable public procurement and corporate databases that can be downloaded in bulk so that any NGO, any researcher can access them and actually connect to the dots, right? So see the company, see who owns the company or how this person is related to somebody who's politically connected, and then understand the network. That's the first step. Another thing is that interconnecting public registers and regularly monitoring red flags via online platform is also something that would have been very much beneficial. Because some countries do certain progress in publishing the data, digitalizing the data, but it's also very, very important to make it more automated, less manual, so that you can automatically, so people who, for example, who are performing audit can automatically see red flags. So this is a politically connected company participating in tender. This is a red flag, so this tender needs additional attention. And finally, because we also devoted some of our attention to the COVID-related corruption risks in public procurement, in general, improving public procurement legal base and reducing the use of non-competitive procedures, especially when it comes to COVID emergency procedures that are not yet lifted in all the countries. And for instance, as it happened in the case of Hungary, instead of COVID emergency procedures, there are now the war-related emergency procedures, but the tenders are not necessarily war-related. It's just that there is a state of emergency in Hungary, which allows for a lot of corruption schemes. So this should be additionally audited and paid attention to, because these tenders are quite often prone to additional corruption risks. I will stop here and gladly ask any questions you have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Viktoriia, for this insightful presentation. I would like the audience, both in person and online, to put some questions. if you'd like some more informations, please.
Thank you very much. Daniel Bellinger from the National Integrity Agency in Romania. You are telling something about bulk data or something, and I want to ask you how difficult it was to access the data and for which country you encountered, let's say, the biggest difficulties in accessing the data. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so first of all, it really depends whether we talk about public procurement data or data on politically connected persons, because these are very different stories. I would say that for those countries that we included in the report, it was relatively easy. So there were 3 countries that remained not included in the regional report. This is Albania, I think Montenegro, and Bosnia. Not sure, so I should double check it. These were 3 countries that we didn't manage to work with. There were certain countries that had issues. For example, with Serbia, the issue was that there was a shift in platform in 2020. And while we can try matching all the data that existed before 2020 and after 2020, the scope of information and the quality of data would be so different that it would be useless at the end of the day to spend a lot of efforts on matching all of that and then end up with like many years of information, but of a way less quality than it was after 2020. So these kind of small technical issues actually create big issues, because if you don't have a systematic, good quality data for a couple of years at least, it's very, very difficult to perform a good quantitative analysis. With politically connected companies, it's the same. So whenever you have a good asset declaration register, which is also like accessible and can be used in order to trace political connections, for instance, that's good. In some of the countries, that's not the case. And then the search would be very manual. So, for example, in the North Macedonia, we now have a situation when we are trying to go over, basically manually, over companies that we have in a public procurement data set to find whether they have political connections or not, because we ended up with just very small number of observations for politically connected companies, which can be because of the country size and the market size. But also we think that, okay, maybe we'll just change a little bit, adjust a little bit the requirements that we have for these kind of companies and search for them manually. So the first thing here would be to get the data in automated way so that you don't have to work with it, by hands, by matching or going through Google and searching through hundreds of companies. While you pass this point, everything else I think is manageable and doable.
Thank you very much, Viktoriia. I think we have very little time for a second question, please. Here comes the mic.
Thank you. Andrei Maxud from the Romanian Academic Society. Viktoriia, you mentioned at one point that the issue of competition, and I'm curious, was there any difference in the competition that politically connected companies' contracts faced versus companies that were not politically connected? I am asking because single bidding is often cited as an indicator of risk, and it wasn't mentioned at all in your presentation. Is there a reason why you said you didn't mention anything about this? Thank you.
A very concise answer, please, Viktoriia.
Yes. So in some countries, we observed that the single bidding indeed was higher for politically connected companies' contracts. In some countries, it was not like that. So it was more or less equal. That's why I didn't include it, because it felt that there is no straightforward regional trend. If we talk about specific countries, I can say something more precise, but in terms of the region, it's less straightforward. In some cases, yes, in some cases, no.
Thank you very much. Without further ado, I will introduce you the second speaker within our panel, Dr. Dragana Rakić, Deputy of President, Democratic Party, member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia. Dragana Rakić has been a member of the National Assembly since the 1st August of 2022. She is also a Deputy President of the Democratic Party. Dragana Rakić occupies various positions. She is a member of several NGOs in the fields of culture, ecology, and sports. She's also very active in her local community in the city of Vršac, where she lives. She was a member of the local parliament for 2 terms between 2012-2020. Her presentation will describe the way in which the state capture is shaped in Serbia, its many faces and interfaces, the shortcomings of the way the Serbian state institutions are tackling this complex phenomenon, as well as its short and long-term effects on economic development, social stability, democracy, and accession in the European Union. Please, Mrs. Dragana Rakić, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation and for opportunity to be here with you and to be speaker on this panel. When criminal groups and oligarchs interfere in state affairs, when a tight connection between political parties, criminal structures, and executive and judicial authorities is being created with a goal to subjugate general interests to private ones, we call these countries captured states. Serbia undoubtedly is a captured state since high-level corruption is constantly present, and there are many examples of the weaknesses of institutions at all levels and their subordination to private interests. Serbia's development, both economical and general social levels, has been hindered by corruption for decades. The high level of corruption makes democratic institutions building impossible, negates European values, and undermines social stability in Serbia. One of the most important cases of the high level corruption in Serbia is that Public Prosecutor's Office does not do its job and does not prosecute those who participate in corrupt and criminal activities. It isn't the laws that enable corruption in Serbia, although laws can always be improved, but the fact that the prosecutor's office does nothing to prevent corruptions. That is why the most important thing when we talk about corruption in Serbia is to answer the question, why does the prosecutor's office refuse to do its job? That is why, for us from the Democratic Party, the public prosecutors, Zagorka Dolovac, and her silence and inaction are a symbol of Serbia as a captured state. The fight against corruption in Serbia will begin when at least one of the current ministers of high-ranking government official gets arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. This has not happened yet, although some of our ministers are associated with numerous affairs. For example, there is evidence that Mr. Siniša Mali plagiarized his doctorate, illegally acquired 24 luxury apartments in Bulgaria, illegally bought 10 hectares of land nearby my hometown, Vršac, ordered the illegal demolition of buildings in Belgrade neighborhood known as Savo Mala. Siniša Mali was not prosecuted for any of these affairs. On the contrary, he was rewarded by becoming the Deputy Prime Minister of the Serbian government and Minister of Finance. There are many examples of large-scale corruption scandals in Serbia. This seems like a very good occasion to draw your attention to the non-transparent way of conducted business of Chinese companies as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. This initiative brings non-transparent credit debts to the citizens of Serbia that will be paid off by the next 3 generations. Irreparable environmental pollution, dirt industry, and labor camps. The Budapest-Belgrade high-speed railway is considered to be one of the most important projects in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Railway reaching its final destination, Piraeus port in Greece, which is already owned by China, would make this project completed. However, according to the Economist Times, the 2 main contractors on this mega project are on the World Bank's blacklist due to financial fraud. In June 2019, the 2 main contractors of these works in Serbia, China Railway Group and China Communications Constructions Company, were brought back to the blacklist of companies World Bank does not want to do business with. This is not the first time China Communications Constructions Company found itself on the World Bank's blacklist. It was already there from 2009 to 2017. However, this did not have any influence on their arrival in Serbia. Thanks to the steel friendship between Serbia and China, and described by the state leaderships, especially by the President Aleksandar Vučić, majority of the projects that Chinese companies manage in Serbia are being set up without public procurement, which makes these operations and financing practically completely non-transparent. This non-transparent way of doing business also suits the authorities in Serbia, and this is confirmed by the fact that China Communications Constructions Company participated in projects worth $1.7 billion in our country, for which the Serbian government took out a loan from the Chinese Exim Bank. China Communications Constructions Company is also the contractor for the $523.5 million worth contract for the highway from Preljina to Požega. It comes as no surprise that these companies are welcomed with all the national honors in captured state like Serbia. It seems like it does not matter that China Communications Constructions Companies' operations are followed, but controversies in many countries where they operate under much stricter control than in Serbia. However, the autocratic and criminal regime of Aleksandar Vučić in Serbia went a step further in the destruction of all instructions, especially the judiciary, which was placed under the complete control of the executive power. The decision maker at the top and people close to them use corruption not only as a source of their power and enrichment, but also as a means to eliminate everyone and anyone who gets in their way and whom they judge to be a threat. The ruling party, led by its president, Aleksandar Vučić, has been stigmatizing, marginalizing and persecuting everyone who criticizes the regime, and no means were chosen in this destruction of individuals. The autocratic regime, Aleksandar Vučić, targeted all those who in public criticized the government and pointed out the bad situation in our country. And among the persecuted were judges, prosecutors, lawyers, university professors, actors, writers, activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens. One of the most drastic examples when it comes to the demonstration of power and arrogance is the illegal expulsion of the children from the kindergarten in Pećinci, only because their parents are political opponents to the ruling party. These children were illegally kicked out of the kindergarten, or how they elegantly call it, placed on the waiting list, as a way to discipline and punish their parents because they participated in protests organized by dissatisfied farmers in last summer. For 5 months now, parents have been fighting to bring their children back to kindergarten. Even though the education system inspector, ombudsman, and commissioner for protection of equality confirmed that the law was broken, that the children were indeed victims of discrimination based on their parents' political affiliation, and that the children need to be urgently returned to kindergarten, this did not happen. The principal of the kindergarten still refuses to act according to the law because she knows that Mr. Milorad Pantić Luki, a tycoon and financier of SNS, Serbian Progress Party, ruling party from Pećinci, and he will be there to protect her. This is to be expected, since she was listening to his orders when she expels these children from the kindergarten. Knowing this, it seems inevitable to conclude that the membership card of the Serbian Progressive Party works like a lucky charm that allows its holder to break the law without any consequences. To sum up everything stated so far, there is no rule of law in Serbia. The law here either does not apply or it is being applied selectively. And that depends only on the criteria, whether you are part of the regime or not. The Democratic Party recognizes the importance of the fight against corruption, and that is why we formed the Fight Against Corruption and Organized Crime Committee within the party, headed by Mr. Danilo Šuković. Last year, this committee adopted the platform for the fight against corruption. This is that document. And I bought a copy of this document today so I can share it with those of you who would like to read it. I would like to finish my speech today a quote from this platform. The fight against corruption in Serbia has so far been only rhetorical and without a good strategy and effective institutions for the implementations. In addition, the incomplete legislative framework and especially the lack of political will provide the opportunity to the government not to react to serious corruption allegations against top government officials and ministers. Even the existing institutions responsible for the fight against corruption do not enjoy the support of the current government. Regardless of that fact that our daily life in Serbia might seem very gloomy, at the moment we cannot give up the fight for a democratic state where zero tolerance for corruption principle will apply. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We will have very little time for questions, so are there any questions from the audience? If not, I was just wondering, just one short question. So do you think that there are some informal mechanism through which, or used by some power structures that somehow prevent the activity of the prosecutor's office? Because you mentioned several times they do not do their job properly. Are there any structures that are doing something to stop them from acting properly?
I will answer in Serbian language. Naš sistem počiva na korupciji.
So Our system is based on corruption.
Tako da Zagorka Dolovac je odabrala sama da ćuti, da se krije od javnosti i da ništa ne radi.
Ms. Zagorka Dolovac decided by herself to stay quiet and do nothing.
I ona se upravo nalazi na toj poziciji zato što je takva. To od nje očekuje vladajuća partija.
She is exactly in this position because this is exactly what is expected from her by the ruling regime.
Srpska napredna stranka, vladajuća partija u Srbiji, je jedna od najmnogoljudnijih partija u Evropi i jedna od najbogatijih partija u Evropi.
The ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, is one of the most numerous parties in membership in the Europe and one of the wealthiest party in Europe.
I veliki deo njenog bogatstva se upravo zasniva na korupciji, za koju se ja nadam da će se u skorijoj budućnosti razotkriti i da, kao što sam rekla, da će neko konačno odgovarati za visoku korupciju.
And the huge part of wealth of this party is based on corruption, which I hope for it will be dealt with in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Dragana Rakić. We will go forward to our third speaker, Professor Dr. Miroslav Milićević, Vice President of the Anti-Corruption Council of the Government of Serbia. Mr. Miroslav Milićević graduated from the Faculty of Medicine back in 1973, having as a specialty the surgical one, and having his PhD in 1984. He served as a head of the 7th Department of the First Surgical Clinic, University of Belgrade Clinical Center. He was elected as a full professor at the Belgrade School of Medicine. He was a postdoctoral Fulbright Fellow at the UCSF California and was a visiting professor at many European universities. He was also awarded the title of Chevalier de Palme Académique. Despite being an award-winning surgeon and a prolific author, Professor Milićević also devoted time to combating corruption and is presently the Vice President of the Government Council Against Corruption since 2012, being an uncompromising proponent of rule of law and civil rights. Professor Dr. Miroslav Milićević's presentation will concentrate on key institutions in the corruption area, existing and mainly non-existing mechanism of countering corruption in Serbia, namely an anti-corruption strategy, as well as reasons for which progress in curbing corruption in Serbia is rather slow. Dr. Milićević, the floor is yours.
First of all, I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to speak. We of the Council Against Corruption don't have such opportunities frequently. For those of you who do not know what the Council Against Corruption Government of Serbia is, I will give a short definition. It is the first anti-corruption body formed in 2001, made up of people in good standing who are not party members, have no political agendas, and no political affiliations. We are a government body, but we are independent because we have drawn our own bylaws, and by these bylaws, we nominate new members that the government appoints. Furthermore, we are a budgetary item, so we cannot be non-financed. Our track record is very good and we have respect, but unfortunately we have been cut off from the media on both sides of the media because all our reports are based only on facts that are available and that can be checked. Among other things, the Council, according to the action plan for Chapter 23, should be invited into work groups for drafting new laws, which does not happen, although we repeatedly draw attention to the government that this is an obligation if the law has potential for corruption. We have so far published more than 70 major reports dealing with corruption, all forms of corruption, from the political system to concealed, non-transparent treaties, agreements. We have talked about the media. We have talked about land, selling of companies, privatization. And I must say that since we were founded, we were never the favorites of any government, and no government really wanted to communicate with us in its full capacity or listen to our reports. It was suggested I give a short overview of what could have happened and what has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what were the possibilities for corruptive activities, and that will probably focus and give insight during my first part of the talk. And I must say the major issue here is, can the administration override medical experts in drawing decisions, and how it has affected the course of the pandemic? It is well known that in irregular conditions like a pandemic, it is very difficult to know what to do. No government was ever prepared for an epidemic, especially not one that turned into a pandemic. We must say that resources were scarce, there were no guidelines, people did not really know what to do, but we came to a certain situation where we had to ask the question, who is to call the shots and who is to make the decisions about what should be done under such conditions? And we know that Serbia has a permanent expert commission for infectious diseases, where the medical experts are delegated by the medical profession. But the government did not want to empower this committee. Instead, they formed a large crisis management committee comprised of 31 members, 14 affiliated members that had no less than 9 government ministers in it. The problem is that when you put together medical experts with administration, it is an unholy marriage, because you have political effects on how the medical profession works. The main coordinator was the Prime Minister, and the co-coordinators were the Ministers of Health. But we believe that the medical profession should have had its own body that was not burdened with political influences, and we are quite certain that the medical profession cannot run a country, but decisions made by the medical profession should have been delegated to the administration, which would decide what is feasible and what is not. In sitting together, we have encountered the process of practically overriding medical decisions, and that has given rise to certain conditions that could initiate corruption at all stages, including state capture. Well, we come to the problem of how transparent was the pandemic. At a certain stage, it became clear that some data had to be given to the public, and a software was made that demanded that all medical institutions report all deaths, new patients, patients on respirators, and patients that have been admitted to hospitals. This software was a good idea, but very soon in this software we realized that something might have been wrong. BIRN, the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, questions the accuracy of this software during 2020 and pointed out that the lethality rate was probably at least 3-fold greater than it was reported. This raised a serious question, and the National Bureau for Statistics verified that this was true according to the death certificates. An independent commission that was made up of by the government has also verified this to be true. And that has shattered trust in the committee, and that posed a certain problem. The committee communicated with the public through press conferences that were broadcasted and through a COVID-19 site that was always available, but at one stage nobody really believed that it was reflecting the real condition. We don't see why would anyone want to conceal data, because COVID infection is a problem of everybody and affecting everybody's life. There was also a problem that the local municipalities reported their rate of new obituaries that highly surpassed the rate of reported letalities. Now, it is understanding that the height of an epidemic, all governments want to secure the means, the necessary equipment to combat the infection. The shortest supply was in respirators, vaccines, and different medications. And then every government undertook activities to secure those items. But we don't understand why should it be a secret how many respirators we have in Serbia. We don't know why we should not know how many respirators were purchased, who sold them, at what price, who sold the vaccines, how did they come to Serbia. The fact is we got a lot of Chinese vaccines. They were bought through a different channel. We got donations from China, donations from the European Union, but all these things actually were not transparent, and we do not know what the costs incurred were. Furthermore, PCR testing was allowed only in government institutions, and all the results were uploaded to a database, which is a good idea. But the question arises, why was PCR testing for traveling in Serbia 81 euros, while it was 30 euros at the Brussels airport? And then a decision was made to produce Russian Sputnik V or Sputnik 5 vaccines at the Torlak Institute in Belgrade. This is not a bad vaccine, and the idea was to invest some 16 million euros, and that was done, and the first vaccines actually showed up on the 4th of June 2021. Another additional 1 million was given from the budget for vials that were probably never used. And we don't know what happened with this investment, since a mutating virus demands that we have new vaccines. Furthermore, it was also decided to build an institution for producing vaccines in Belgrade, and that was done in a consortium of Serbia, United Arab Emirates, and China. This building was supposed to produce 40 million vaccines per year, and it cost about 40 million euros. It was constructed, but since it was supposed to produce the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine, which was going out of favor, we don't know what the future of this institution will be. Now we come to the point that it was decided that Serbia needed 3 new hospitals because the hospital capacities were burdened and were inefficient. And the decisions was made to rapidly erect 3 big major hospitals. That's an investment of several hundred million of euros, and that was a good idea, but we do not know how the contractors were selected. We don't know who sold the equipment, and we don't know what prices were paid for those things. What I want to point out is that in an epidemic like such, where irregular conditions exist, it is very difficult to determine the parameters to declare that something was a state capture, because certain companies got the businesses. The same company that erected the hospitals erected the plant for producing the vaccines. Now, in my talk, I wish to focus on something else. We all know what should be done to combat state capture. But before we can do that, we need to see state capture in its essence and how it is done and what the mechanisms are, not just to iterate what we already know, that we should have transparency, accountability, we should have monitoring. We know those things, but I will raise the questions that how we do those things. You see, an example of state capture that I think is beyond doubt is the privatization of the Miroslav Water Institute in Belgrade, and this is one of the major reports that we have published last year. The Anti-Corruption Council believes that the privatization and the sale of Miroslav Institute is contrary to the interests of Serbia and illicit for a number of reasons, and that it cannot subsist and the cancellation is necessary or the reversion is. What are we talking about? I will try to make my presentation as short as possible. This is a major institute for controlling water in Serbia. It has been in existence for more than 70 years. It is comprised of 117 engineers, and it has 19 PhDs, and it is an essential part of controlling water and protecting the environment in Serbia. Now, there is no reason why such an institute should be sold. It should always remain under control of the government. At least the major control package should belong to the government, because it is the regulatory institute that gives permits for construction. We know from experience of neighboring transition countries that they have had big problems in privatizing such institutes, and regardless of the fact, it was decided that this institute should be sold. Now, we don't see any single reason why it should be sold, especially since it was not losing money, it was making money in its work. And now we come to another issue, and that is, why did the government decide to sell this institute and who was consulted? We do not know that, but what we do know is that 7 directors of the institute engaged themselves in organizing the assessment of the assets and also the sale. And after the sale, they bought 30% of the institute. Now, we come to the problem that the council analyzed. We think the price was far too low, and we also think the sale should not have been conducted. And we asked the ministry to give us the report on how the assets were evaluated. Of course, we were turned down. Now, we come to another issue, and that is the question of whether an institute that is not just an institute, but is a scientific and research institute, can be sold in such a manner. And we know that according to Article 57 of the Law of Science and Research, that cannot happen unless a big study is done by the respective ministry, and that study should consult the Council of Scientific and Technological Development of Serbia, which is an independent institution. No such consultation was done. Then we came to the point of asking how come the directors could sell the institute to themselves, and whether that is a conflict of interest or not. According to the Law of Prevention of Corruption, and if we look at Article 2 and Article 42.1, the directors were obliged to ask the agency whether there is a conflict of interest, which they, of course, they did not do that. And all of a sudden, the parliament that is controlled by the ruling party, without anybody asking for it, gave an authentic interpretation of Article 42.1, stating that there is no conflict of interest, since those people were not public officials at the moment of sale. This has created a big disruption in combating conflict of interest, because at least 300 procedures were dropped, and few thousand people were relieved of having a conflict of interest. Now, what could be the consequences of such a sale, and who is the captor? The captor is the Millennium Company, one of the most powerful construction companies in Serbia, with very close ties to the ruling party and the ruling officials. And one would ask, why would a regulatory institute for something as important as water in Serbia be sold to a construction company that has nothing to do with scientific work and scientific research? The answer is self-evident, because this company conducted construction of big parts of the Belgrade waterfront. They are working on the Belgrade subway, and they will need to get permissions and get reports on why they could do some construction work close to waterways, and that would have a very big impact on the environment in Serbia.
Sorry, I'm afraid I have to ask you kindly to conclude.
I'm
because
concluding.
Time is not on our side.
I'm
Thank you.
concluding. We sent a report to the Prime Minister, the respective ministries, to the Public Prosecutor's Office, to the Ministry of Interior, and published our documents and detailed reports. The Prosecutor's Office stated that there is no conflict of interest according to the authentic interpretation of Article 42.1, which was iterated by all the other institutions without any further investigations or evaluating what we said. Now, the conclusion of the Council is clear, and that is something we need to discuss. When there are no independent institutions functioning in their full capacity, no functioning regulatory agencies, and when there is no balance of power and the media are controlled, implementing rule of law is extremely difficult, and state capture will frequently occur.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milićević. Are there any questions from the audience? If not, just a quick question. I was wondering, because you mentioned that the relationship with the government is not quite functional. Have the Anti-Corruption Council received any support from the civil society or EU institutions or any other structures in order to strengthen the capacity and give a greater impact to the activity of the Anti-Corruption Council?
I will answer in 2 stages. First, our communication with all governments, not just this government, practically does not exist. We send our reports to the government, give them a 7-day grace period to answer what they are going to undertake and what they think of the report. They have never answered any of our issues. We have frequently asked for meetings with the Prime Minister. We have nominated 5 new members last year. All 5 new members were refused. The second issue is a very important issue, and we come to the fact why we consider ourselves to be the sole, totally independent institution combating corruption. We do not do projects, we do not receive donations, we make do with the money we get as a budgetary item because that secures our independence and we cannot be foreign traders or paid by anybody from abroad.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milićević. We will quickly go to our 4th speaker, Mr. Bart de Bruijn, Regional Rule of Law Coordinator at the Embassy of Netherlands in Belgrade. Mr. Bart de Bruijn obtained a master's degree at the University of Groningen and the University of Maastricht. His research in Groningen focused on the success of the Ghanaian economic reform programs. He was formally appointed to the Sub-Saharan Africa Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He then worked for the Ministry of Economic Affairs until 2012. He came back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2012, and then in 2014 he was posted for 2 years at the Dutch Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, before joining the Dutch Embassy in Warsaw until 2 years ago. Bart is now posted at the Embassy of Belgrade, although he has a regional position. Bart de Bruijn is specialized in the rule of law, EU accession process, trade promotion, development, cooperation, and defense policy. His presentation will make actually a comparative approach of the rule of law index, the perception of the corruption index, and freedom in the world index for some of the EU member states, highlighting a series of observations on the rule of law in the Western Balkan region and some lasting problems such as judicial independence, corruption, clientelism, nepotism, and media freedom. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. There's one more speaker after me, and I think we're already lagging behind, and I think everybody's looking forward to the coffee break, which is always, I think, the most important, because then we can talk to each other. So I'll keep it limited to 10 minutes, and please do cut me off, Simona, if I speak longer. Sure. I was asked to make a presentation, so I have a presentation in PowerPoint. It will be turned on, yeah. I will try to look you in the crowd, but also focus a bit here, because the presentation is right in front of me. Like was said, I have a regional role, regional rule of law coordinator. I supervise a team of local policy officers at our different embassies in the Western Balkan 6. And our main aim, our core business, is that we have a good understanding of the rule of law developments in the region, in different countries. And that is input for my colleagues, mostly the ones in The Hague and also the ones in Brussels, who are engaged in all those discussions about the Western Balkan 6. Should we open clusters? Should we open chapters? Should we proceed? Etc. So my presentation, I'll keep it short and brief. It's 7 sheets, but I'll go through it quite quickly. I will touch upon a few things that are regional. So I will not go into the country-specific developments. I look at it from a bird's eye view. What do I see in the region? On rule of law, and specifically on public procurement and the topic of this panel. I can change it myself. Yeah, the first sheet, I hope you can see it from a distance. Yeah, it should be clear. The rule of law index, it's always interesting to talk about rule of law, but it's quite subjective. How do you view a rule of law situation? And I think it's very good to look at the different indexes that are developed by different NGOs. And not look at just one, but look at several ones. And if you take them all together, I think you can see certain trends. Well, what is the trend we see here? The lowest ones on the bottom are mostly all the Western Balkan 6 countries, except I think Bulgaria is there as well. And then the top 2 are the newer member states, Croatia and Romania, who are certainly a few levels higher, or level higher, let's put it that way. And then in the bottom of the sheet, you can see all random a couple of other member states. And I think except for Greece, that is at the same level as Croatia and Romania on this rule of law index, all the others are higher. Also the countries that joined the EU in this big bang, or this big enlargement, I think it was in 2004. So countries like Lithuania and Poland, despite its challenges, and countries like Slovakia have really improved, in the Czech Republic. Because they also had considerable rule of law challenges in the 90s. Let's not forget that. I remember a Polish colleague in Brussels who said, let's not forget that in the 90s they had a serious organized crime problem and they countered that. And now, I mean, they have other challenges on rule of law still, but they made improvement on that specific topic. Okay, then I have one more. The Corruption Perception Index, well known by all of us. This is a more diverse picture, but also here you see that the Western Balkans is not really improving. And except for Greece, all the other member states, so that's the line in the bottom of the sheet, are higher up. And that's a bit my point if I go back to the previous sheet and this one, you don't see a real improvement. You see stagnation or even backlash, except rule of law is not a linear process, so sometimes you would see countries suddenly jumping up, making improvements, the government being really committed, but then you would see a backlash a few years later. Okay, and then the third one, quickly one, is more about political rights and civil rights, the Freedom in the World Index, and there you also see that the Western Balkans not really improving, let's say stagnating, some countries maybe improving a bit, but mostly stagnating. And the new member states, Croatia, Bulgaria and Romania, are a level higher, and all the other countries in the bottom are considerably higher. So what does this say? I already said rule of law, some general observations. Rule of law is not a linear process. Improvement in a couple of years could also be followed up by some backlash the years after. But if we look to the EU progress reports, that's always an important moment every year when those reports are published and we look at them in detail. You do see that the countries make some progress, certainly on certain fields, but mostly on the fields, I would say, economically, social sector, social chapters. But on rule of law, it's less positive, although also there, in the different countries, you would see implementation of EU legislation, the so-called acquis communautaire, and you would see strengthened legal frameworks, and also judicial efficiency improves in several countries. So there is certain improvements on certain topics. But, and that's all I think well known for people here, the persistent problems remain, judicial independence. When I travel the region, I often speak to judges, prosecutors, people from the government, civil society, journalists, all different people. And often judges and prosecutors emphasize adjudicating in a certain case. The courts are functioning, it's working, but the moment you have to adjudicate in a case with an important people, powerful person, sometimes judges, prosecutors rather report they're sick on that day, or they rather not adjudicate, or sometimes they said, I rather resign. And I think that is a worrying development. And that's also not always supported, and we could touch upon the political will, that politicians in campaigns too often criticize judges, prosecutors as a punchback, I think, for sometimes their own failure. Again, I'm generalizing regionally. There's certainly countries within the region where, and a lot of politicians with the best efforts and the best intentions, but this is just a general view I hear when traveling the region. Corruption, I think not much to add on what's written there. We all know it. I also want to speed up a bit. Clientelism and nepotism. Yeah, I think it's small countries, all of the Western Balkan 6, maybe Serbia a bit bigger, but most are quite small. People know each other, people trust their own contacts and less trust in the structures, in the institutions. So it's often, as one of my colleagues always says, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And that's how things work. That is not exceptional for the Western Balkan 6. That is in many countries in the world, also within the EU, but I think it's quite present here in the region. And then the last point, media freedom here. I think it's always very important. I'm always impressed about important work and the brave work a lot of journalists do. Despite the little pay they get, the oversaturated markets, a lot of competition, a lot of hard work. People don't have the money to pay for quality news. So people go online, so it's all that free media. How can you make a living of that? And then in the meantime, you get also criticized sometimes by politicians, and it's difficult. And you have often also, and that is something I see in the whole region, that owners of media outlets have certain business interests. So yes, they bring decent reporting, but the moment it touches upon their business interests, it's a different story.
Thank you. Do you still have some?
Yeah, I will skip.
I'm afraid, yeah.
I will.
We have
to
go
public procurement.
very quickly, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just go to the last sheet then, and then you can read this one afterwards. If we talk about public procurement, I think it was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers, there's often a failure to investigate and prosecute reported irregularities. So you have an anti-corruption agency that does a report on the irregularities, brings forward certain irregularities, but then there's no prosecution. And that has several reasons: lack of capacity. The Norwegian ambassador mentioned also ethical culture plays into that, lack of political will. Sometimes institutions on purpose are not being made that strong, so they don't act independently. And the worst case, sometimes even politicians can end up behind bars if there's really a functioning rule of law. And then my last point, and then I'm really going to stop. Why is it the interest of the EU? Well, I think these countries have the ambition of joining the EU. That's also in the interest of the EU. We want them to join, but the EU has also its own rule of law problems, and we want to avoid making the EU weaker. So I think that's the main thing. And also when more EU funding is going to the region, which is already happening now, and I think that's very positive, let's emphasize on that as well. Dysfunctioning rule of law, not functioning public procurement has certain risks, and also risks for the EU, and through that also political risk for our own politicians, because they are elected into office.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruijn. I'm afraid because of the fact that time is really, really pressing and we have to observe the schedule. We do not have time to take questions, so I invite you to approach Mr. De Bruijn during the coffee break and put questions and further discuss. I'm afraid we have to take it during the coffee break because we are, I know, very, 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 very short.
Please.
Do you know that 1 year ago, the European Court of Auditors published a report on, I don't know if you know this, on EU support for the rule of law in the Western Balkans, which was devastating, actually. I think...
Please, okay, I understand. So,
yeah.
Mr. De Bruijn, if you can quickly answer.
Yeah, very quickly. I know the report, Court of Auditors on the rule of law, indeed, some strong conclusions. We analyzed it. We also pushed in Brussels for further follow-up on that. So we are certainly aware of that. I think it's good you mentioned that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we go to our last speaker, Mr. Savo Manojlović. He's an activist and a legal expert. He's a law graduate at the University of Belgrade and a PhD in constitutional law. He was a junior advisor at the Constitutional Court in Serbia, a secretary of working groups in Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Finance. He was a central coordinator of the Anti-Corruption Agency for monitoring the financing of the political campaign for the local, provincial and general elections in 2012. He has been engaged in a number of projects related to judicial reform, improving the economic environment, consumer protection, financing political parties, or transparent employment. His presentation will concentrate on two very exciting topics. media agency close to political parties, and on the one hand, and secret financing of political parties. Savo, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I would like to thank organizers to this chance to speak here. Because we don't have so much time, I will focus on media topic.
Thank you.
Because I think if we talk about state capture, media corruption is Serbia one of the main reasons why we can talk here today about state corruption. Regarding the media image, we have on one part of the media scene, we can say complete and absolute control. There was a merge between public resources and private media and private media agency. If we talk about media corruption, I think the most important document is the report from the Anti-Corruption Council from 2011, and the interesting thing is that nothing changed if we compare these two situations. We have after 2012 that the government is changed, but we have the same player on the table, and the same people control media scene for the previous government and from the government in the past. I also want to admire Mr. Milićević. I really appreciate his work, and I like to say that in Serbia we have two institutions which work their job. One is Anti-Corruption Council, and I could not remember the second one. What is the mechanism of this control? We have the public media and public service. We usually have one private media agency which buy time from that public service, then sell multiple time for the public companies and private ones, and then they also share that money with private media which they control. That is the base. That is the base concept of how we have state capture and how we have this media scene which we are looking in Serbia today. I would also like to mention one more point. This is the regulation body, REM. That should be independent agency, but it's very interesting that last year we had situation how they share national frequencies. Nothing was how to be sure, but let's say it's completely controlled by a ruling political party. They didn't have even one certain criteria how they share that national frequencies. If we are compare, for example, work of private TV station which get national frequencies, we could see that they even reach the formal criteria. For example, they should have a cultural program from children, educational program, but they don't have that. They have only news and TV shows. This is only formal criteria. We don't talk about political control. So the rule of law, it's not something what we should develop here. There is no rule, there is no law. If we talk about REM. And to be very clear, the actor of these two are the same during all this period. If you ask me, and if we read this report and some report later and analyze a little bit, we could say that 3 persons are the key controller of the media scene. Nebojša Krstić, Dragan Vučićević, and Željko Mitrović. And to conclude, so if you have questions, we can maybe speak later during the coffee break. corruption and media control is one of the top priority problems. Until this problem is solved, I think Serbia could not become the European country. I think that political parties are not the one who will solve this problem. They create this problem. But to be honest, I also don't think that the international communities definitely work on this problem. But if you ask me, I don't see that this problem is something which is top of their priority list. I think that they are more interesting to exploit lithium, and the human rights and media freedom are not the top of their list, definitely. If we talk about Serbian citizens, I want to mention 2011. We have public initiative which give the clear criteria about how to solve some problem about media coverage. During last years, we have 200,000 signatures, which gives also support to them to work their job and to implement some rule of law standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Savo, and thank you all the speakers for sharing their experience and for their interventions. I'm afraid we have to stop here. One quick question.
Thank you very much.
Short
I'm
remark.
aware about the importance of coffee times. Agree with Mr. Bruijn, but only one comment about Mr. Manojlović's speech. I have to do because of my colleagues in front of institution I am in charge. I know the second and much more all other institutions which function. One of them here, I'm Commissioner for Protection of Equality. Mrs. Rakić just mentioned some very important and very sensitive cases, and also Mr. Milićević just mentioned some cases which we issued last year about cases of discrimination when they proposed a member of the new Anti-Corruption Council. And I think it's very important, don't mix and be careful when you give some public statement, because we face with devastation of system of power, not all institutions doesn't function, because it's really frustrated for us, for civil servants who really work every day, who are really hard-working person. It's not a good idea to demotivate whole institutions and civil servant. I think that we are here together to tackle against captured state and devastation of system of power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the intervention.
Thank you. Let's say when we are talking, there is no big and small institution. Of course, in public system, there is a lot of people. All the time in media, I speak about one of the prosecutor, Predrag Milovanović, and his great work. And always we admire, but they are just part of the whole system. Here the topic was corruption. So this is the reason why I mentioned. So let's say that you add. But if we talk about corruption, I was very clearly that anti-corruption and anti-corruption council is the only public institution, and unfortunately is institution with our efficient power and authority.
Thank you very much for these last remarks. I invite everybody to the coffee break, and if someone has questions, please approach the speakers.
Well, hello, good morning, and all colleagues and friends. I regret very much that I can't be there with you in person, because this is actually the way how we discuss these topics, especially in the Western Balkan, if we can sit together and elaborate on what is necessary to do. But nevertheless, I'm very much honored to be here now online discuss the critical issue of state capturing in Southeast Europe with a special focus on the Western Balkans. State capture is a grave threat to democracy and to rule of law, and it undermines the functioning of market economies and the welfare of citizens. In Serbia and elsewhere throughout the region, state capturing is a significant concern, particularly in the form of corruption from political connected companies. And you're all very much aware of what we are speaking about. These companies often use their political connections to gain undue advantages in the market, distorting competition and abusing public resources for private gain. To tackle state capture in Serbia and throughout Southeast Europe, we must take a comprehensive approach that addresses both the symptoms and the root causes of this problem. This, for example, includes strengthening of institutions. We must bolster the independence and effectiveness of key institutions, such as the judiciary, law enforcement agencies, and anti-corruption agencies. This will help ensure that those who engage in state capturing are held accountable for their actions. We have to improve transparency. We must increase transparency in key areas, such as public procurement and the management of state-owned enterprises. This will help deter corruption and make it easier to detect and prosecute cases of state capturing. We have to enhance civic engagement. We must empower our citizens, your citizens, to actively participate in the democratic processes and hold their leaders accountable. This includes providing citizens with the information and tools they need to understand and engage with public policy issues, and supporting civil society organizations, independent civil society organizations that work to promote transparency and accountability. International cooperation. We must also improve international cooperation to fight corruption and state capturing by strengthening existing international mechanisms, establishing new ones, and improving mutual legal assistance and extradition of suspects. And of course, such a conference as yours today is part of this international networking, international cooperation, exchange of views of experts, and many more. We must also recognize that state capturing is not just a problem in the Southeast Europe, but it is a global one. And looking at my own home country, Germany, which is a heaven for money laundering, and we have so many dysfunctionality in terms of tax revenues and many more. So that is important to see that we in the, let's say, European Union member states here have not done enough to put in safeguarding where, I mean, we can really fight this kleptocracy and anti-corruption and state capturing money laundering, and to help and to support you in your endeavor. Therefore, it is essential to work together and learn from each other's experience to effectively tackle state capture. State capture is a significant threat to democracy and the rule of law in Southeast Europe, and it undermines the functioning of market economies and the welfare of citizens. We must also work to break up the concentration of power in the hands of a select few. We see that the families that rule the countries, like Dodik family in the Republika Srpska or the Đukanović family in Montenegro, use their influence to further their interests at the expense of the broader population. I know that fighting state capturing corruption is definitely not easy. And the example of North Macedonia, where an EU member state hosts the former autocrat Nikola Gruevski, preventing the prosecution is also discouraging. Yet, I want to see the principled and fair approach from us here in the European Union, and that's why my political group, the Greens, stand. I wish to see a region that will stop the clientelism, the nepotism, omnipresent corruption, and put behind bars those who steal the future from your kids and your younger generation. You always have a strong ally in me and my group and the support here from the European Parliament. I wish you all a great work, a very fruitful conference and inspiring debates. Looking very much forward next time to see and to meet you all in person. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Ms. von Kramon. The program now proceeds directly to the first panel titled Countering State Capture, Exposing Corruption Risks from Politically Connected Companies. At the end of every panel, the audience can pose questions in person, online by leaving their comments, or via the Zoom platform by checking the option Raise Hand, after which we will be able to talk to them.
Now, let me welcome Ms. Simona Ernu, Executive Director of the Romanian Academic Society, who will tell us more about the topic of the panel, present the panelists, and begin discussion within today's first panel. Dear panelists, please take your seats at the stage.
Glad to meet you. Please welcome. Simona, glad to meet you. Hello, glad to meet you. Ciao. So, good morning everybody. It is my pleasure to host the first panel of the conference. It is my pleasure at the same time to present you 5 speakers from this conference, speakers that have very different profiles, very different experiences and practices when it comes to promoting rule of law and fighting corruption. I will start by presenting our first speaker, who has an online presentation, Viktoriia Poltoratskaia. She's a senior analyst at the Government Transparency Institute, and she works as a non-partisan. This government institute from Hungary is a think tank that is researching and advocating good governance. There are multiple projects that Viktoriia is involved in, including participation in the civil society, advancing beneficial ownership transparency group on beneficial ownership data and countering anti-money laundering. She holds a master's degree in political science and from the Central European University, and she's currently enrolled to a postgraduate program in political economy. Her independent research focuses on clientelism and political corruption in the Russian region. Viktoriia worked as a teaching assistant at CU for multiple courses and mostly related to research methods and design, impact evaluation, and political economy. She's interested in various policy evaluation techniques as well. Her presentation will focus on presenting the main findings and policy recommendation from the report which was recently launched. The report that was developed by the Regional Good Governance Public-Private Partnership Platform and is the second South Europe Good Governance report. Her presentation will focus on analysis, public procurement analysis, and I will present her. I suppose she's already online. So, Viktoriia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me online. I'm very sorry that I was not able to attend in person, but apparently COVID still exists, so please get tested if you don't feel well. So today I will be presenting the results of the regional chapter that we were preparing based on the analysis that we conducted for politically connected companies and the associated corruption risks in public procurement in the region. Maybe just a little bit of a background of this report. So the countries that were involved in the analysis are Serbia, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Bosnia. So what I'm going to be presenting is the average trends that we observed in the region. And if you have any country-specific questions, I'm happy to address them. But there were certain trends or certain similarities that I think are quite universal for all of these cases. And the same goes to the recommendation part. So the first thing that we observed when we were looking at the corruption risks associated with the politically connected companies in public procurement is that while there is a big variation in contract volume share and contract value share of politically connected firms across countries in the region. So we would observe some countries where it would be on average around like 5% of all contracts or of the total value of contracts per year. And some countries with a way higher numbers, so around 15, 16%. Yet we would also observe a very similar to all of these countries, a very similar trend, which is a higher numbers when we look at the same CPV division. So CPV division is something that helps us to identify the market within which the public procurement was happening. So if we see that there is on average a higher number of